This cycle, you've heard a lot about tariffs, and depending on who you've heard it from, you may think they are the best thing ever, the worst thing ever. They might make China pay for the wall, they might save the economy, they might cure male pattern baldness. But what are tariffs? Most people don't know. Most people might oversimplify it to the idea that it's a tax on foreign goods, and that's kind of right. But we took a whole bunch of questions from Twitter and decided to dive in to understand what tariffs are, how it's going to impact the US economy, how it plays into onshoring US manufacturing, and all those relevant points for the current political debate. So the very first question that people have, obviously, is just, what is a tariff? Nice and generic. So you may have heard that it's a tax on a foreign good coming into the country, and that's kind of correct, but in an oversimplified way. Just like when you're going through your science curriculum, and at one point in elementary school, we tell you the atom is the smallest thing in the universe. And then as you grow and go through your education, we eventually go, well, there's actually these subatomic particle things, but they're super complicated, so we left that part out till later. The same thing goes for tariffs. The easiest way that we can explain it is that everything that comes into this country could be eligible for a tariff. It all comes in through what we call a port of entry, and it will have a bill of landing, which is the CVS receipt of international shipping. Now, when you go out and you buy sketchy purchases on Temu and bring those into the country, there's a chance that your shipping agent might have to pay on your behalf a tariff that they add on to your bill, and that's when they knock at your door and say that you owe them more money on these duties and custom fees that have come up during the shipping process. But for most items that are being brought into the country by major retailers, what's taking place is they're ordering those goods, the crate comes in, let's say it's clothing for Walmart, and they get a bill of landing, and that bill of landing will tell them what percentage fee that item category has to pay in additional fees on top of the value of the item. And that money comes from that retailer and goes directly to the US Treasury. And it's important to note that it's the retailer paying those, so their cost of goods go up, and they're going to pass those costs of goods on to you. So why do we even have tariffs? What's their purpose? The US does have domestic manufacturing, including in industries like steel, automobiles, and other trade goods. The US also has a high quality standard in production, in labor requirements, and environmental requirements that can be costly to maintain. When foreign countries with different standards, different costs, flood the US market with cheap product, that creates a systemic risk for the US manufacturing industry. And so it's important for us to be able to increase the prices that are paid on that foreign good, especially if it's a lower quality foreign good, to maintain the competitiveness of the US domestic industry, keep people employed, and keep production happening in America. But importantly, this only works if it's an industry that America already has production capacity in. A great example of this is the US steel industry. For many years, China propped up its own steel industry with incentives, with tax rebates, with bonuses on hiring, all because China was going through a major industrial revolution. It was building new factories, it was building new housing and apartments at an alarming rate, and it needed a large quantity of steel, so it bolstered this industry and supported it artificially. At a certain point, Chinese growth leveled off. They're actually destroying empty and vacant buildings and not having the same steel requirements. This cheaply made steel is now being exported to flood the US market, and that's taking away purchasing from US quality made steel, hurting US manufacturing industry and causing jobs to disappear. So the US added a tariff to the foreign steel to bring it up to the same price as the American domestic steel, allowing that purchasing to be redirected towards the US good. Now, because of the complexity of supply chains and switching vendors, even when that good is now more expensive and the same price as the US good, some manufacturers don't switch suppliers over to the US. So when they get their bill of landing, they'll pay that additional tariff out of their own pocket to the US Treasury for importing the foreign good. And that money can be used to create various types of programs that help offset the loss of jobs here in America. So why does Trump and some of his supporters say that China pays the tariff? And that's a great question if you don't understand how these things work and how they're represented. Tariffs are monitored on something that we call trade balances, which are basically these ledgers between countries that track the import and export of foreign goods in dollar values of your own currency. So whenever America exports something of $5 value, we say that trade balance is plus $5. Whenever America imports something of $5 of value, we say it's negative $5. And because in the trade relation between America and China, America is a net importer, that trade balance is in negative numbers. However, when we add a tariff, we're doing two things. First, we're changing the financial consideration and the flow of money back to the US Treasury by whatever that tariff amount is. And we're redirecting some portion of that foreign buying to US domestic buying. So what you'll see is that a negative $5 price would come off of the Chinese balance, and a plus $5 price would go on to the American balance. And in any other situation, if you looked at a $5 balance negative change here and a $5 positive change here, you would think account A simply paid account B. That is the logical conclusion. But that's simply not how trade balances work. It doesn't examine where the money came from. It only examines the nominal value of those dollars in the flow of trade. So the reality is that the US consumer who's buying that from the retailer or importing it into the country through shipping is the one paying it. And this is why tariffs, when selectively applied, are inflationary to those products. And when broadly applied in blanket tariffs, are inflationary to the entire economy as a whole, because it is you, the US consumer, who ends up paying. It's why we have to be so specific with this delicate tool in order to protect US domestic interests, but not overextend it. One popular question was if tariffs are a bad thing, like a lot of the left side of the aisle is saying right now, why would Biden have kept a number of the Trump era tariffs? And I want to really reiterate that tariffs are not a bad thing, not in and of themselves. They're a tool that when we use it correctly works. If we use a hammer as a boomerang, it's a really bad boomerang. But if we use a hammer to hammer nails, it's a very effective tool. The same goes for tariffs. If we use them for a blanket trade war across industries that we don't have domestic production capacity for, it's a bad tool. If we use them to protect US job interests, it's a good tool. The steel tariffs that Trump put in place were a good thing, and the Biden administration continued those. And I'll even concede that the automobile tariffs that Trump wants to place on both China and Mexico make a lot of sense for protecting the capacity of American factories to continue to build high-quality automobiles in America. But putting blanket tariffs across every industry, including ones that America doesn't have the production capacity for or needs to import the raw materials to produce, that's a problem. The next question I had is, isn't this just a negotiation tactic? We've heard a lot that Trump will threaten these things, or other administrations will threaten these things and use that as a negotiation tactic. And that can be the case. When we use select tariffs or threaten to use select tariffs in trade, that can be part of the negotiation plan in dealing with other countries. The problem is that blanket tariffs don't do that. If we're targeting industries that, say, China did have a large federal ownership of, and importantly, exports at a skewed distribution to America, then sure, saying, hey, we're going to put a tariff on that if we can't get discounts on products you've put tariffs on, that would be a great negotiating tactic. But when we tell China we're going to put tariffs on everything at high values, that doesn't make a lot of sense because the American consumer has nowhere else to buy. China is deeply aware that 55% of all products bought in America come from China, and another 36% of products bought in America use Chinese-sourced raw materials. China also has a rare advantage here over America. In being an authoritarian government that's used to not listening to its people, that's used to propping up its own economy, getting into a full-scale trade war that's inflationary to both sides is something that China can hold on to a lot longer. They can ignore the will of the people a lot longer, they can insulate their economy a lot longer, and they can print money to prop up their economy a lot longer. If America attempts to use blanket tariffs of 60+% on all Chinese goods to get into a trade war with China, it's the American people who will blink first, because we will feel the pain when our shelves are empty, costs are up 60%, and because we haven't yet built the factories, we're still paying 60% more for the same Chinese goods. Another question that I got was, why do tariffs impact inflation? Can't we simply not buy stuff? And I mean, yeah, maybe. Maybe we might curb down consumerism. That's never happened in US history before, even with shifting culture across many generations. But let's imagine for a moment that we did decide that a number of these expendable products, toys, extra clothing, the latest watches, all these kinds of surplus goods weren't being purchased. Not only will that have a major impact on the retail economy and the shipping economy and other US jobs, but when we look to essential services, whether that's the food that we eat, the refrigerators that keep our food fresh, the shipping supply lines, or the electrical generators that power the electrical grid, they all have parts sourced from China and from other export countries. In fact, a lot of the feed that the meat you consume eats comes from other countries. It's not domestically produced in America. And so we will see a large impact on non-goods, and we can't just decide not to buy, even if suddenly that happened, even if we suddenly changed our minds about consumerism. I just don't think we're going to stop buying cool stuff anytime soon. The next question becomes, can't we just make these products in America? We used to build things. We can. It just takes a long time, and we don't have that industrial capacity right now. To put this in perspective, China has 112 million people working in factories right now today. America does not have that human capacity, but we also don't have the factories or currently the raw materials to build the factories. The best estimates I've been able to find is that for simple factories, to build out this scale of simple factories, will take 5 to 7 years. During that 5 to 7 year span, you're stuck still buying from China. And even with that 5 to 7 years, we have to solve, how do we have 112 million laborers replaced? So the next obvious question becomes, well, what about all these robotics? Doesn't Elon have this amazing AI robot, and aren't factories becoming more and more automated? Yeah, they are. But automated factories are very expensive and they take a long time to build. High margin products like cars and computers, you can build an automated factory for that. But people who are manufacturing socks probably aren't going to take the time to invest in highly automated factories. That also extends our timeline from 5 to 7 years up to 10 years to build out all of this capacity. And we still have a problem, because the best situation that we have in offsetting labor seems to be around 80% with automation. Because even when you offset that, you still need some amount of blue-collar labor working on those lines supporting the automation. But you also create new jobs in oversight and repair, and on the programming side, you do impact the economy a lot. You can't offset 100% of the human capital. So that maybe takes us from 112 million laborers needed to 20 million laborers needed. And the US unemployment only sits around 6 million. That means we're going to have far more jobs than we have demand for. And unless we're very, very progressive on our immigration policies to bring in tens of millions of new skilled laborers in that 5-year span, then we're going to create a tremendous amount of demand for employees, which is going to drive prices higher and in turn wages higher, because we're making more and more competitive offers. And as the cost of living goes up and the amount of wages in the economy goes up, we get a dangerous type of inflation that's called a price-wage spiral. So how do we bring back manufacturing into the United States if it's not this way? How do we protect domestic industry and get fair deals in trade? Slowly, over time. I'm very supportive of the idea of bringing back US domestic industry and manufacturing in the United States. It's something that has to happen. And I think that's something that we're seeing on both sides of the aisle begin to develop, is this awareness that we shouldn't be so dependent on foreign supply chains. We should be able to build things in America. But it comes with economic incentives, and these can be specialty trade-free zones where building factories is a tax-deductible thing. Employing the local economy is a tax-deductible thing. Having tax breaks for manufacturers who hire a sufficient amount of full-time unionized employees that they provide healthcare to. Giving stipends and bursaries for those who go to trade schools and do apprenticeships at a much higher and aggressive level. And having progressive immigration policies on skilled laborers who want to work blue-collar jobs, resettling into America. We should make that an easy process. If you want to come here, be part of the new industrial revolution, contribute, pay your taxes, that should be an easy thing to do. But that is a delicate process with targeted tariffs and specific economic policies and immigration policies that happens over a decade. And no matter what we do, we will not have the industrial production capacity to absorb the tariffs, the blanket tariffs being on all imported goods within the next 5 to 7 years. That means at the end of the day, if we use blanket tariffs, if we use this tool wrong, this precision tool, if we use it as a blunt instrument, we end up paying 60%, 100%, whatever number they want to slap on. We end up paying that as this inflationary cost of living. All of our prices go up, and we are paying more for the same Chinese good. It is the largest and broadest tax policy in the world, and is something that could stunt the growth and the progress of the US economy for a decade to come. Tariffs are a good thing when used correctly, and both sides of the aisle, both Trump and Biden, have successfully used tariffs in specific ways that have benefited the US economy, and both have identified new sectors where we should have tariffs. I'm giving both sides credit to say both sides have used tariffs correctly. But that doesn't mean that blanket tariffs are going to achieve what we want them to. So it might seem that tariffs are this straightforward cure-all that is going to make China pay and balance our trade budget, protect US jobs, and restart the economy. And when used correctly, yeah, kind of, a little bit, except for the China paying part, it can protect US jobs. But they're a precision tool in a complex economic strategy that is nuanced and balances US interests with international goods. And the only way that we are able to bring back those jobs is using them correctly. So I hope this breakdown gives you a little bit more insight into what tariffs are, how they impact these goals, and why blanket tariffs just aren't going to achieve the rebirth of the American dream that we hope they will. But there are ways to get there, and we can do this. We just need to do it right.